looking to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Hello and welcome to ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. We're coming to you live from Manila and Cambodia. Hello, Crystal.
Hi, Alma. Good afternoon. And to everyone who's watching with us right now, I am Crystal Ann Ballesteros from your EBC Cambodia Bureau, bringing you the news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines, we're happy to have on the show Mr. Enrique Ray Glenn Villaroman, the Chief Executive Officer of Axel Sprout Corporation, an agricultural business accelerator and a consultancy firm. He will talk about COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on food and agriculture.
The annual Balikatan exercises between the Philippines and the United States will go full scale next year, Armed Forces of the Philippines or AFP Chief General Jose Faustino Jr. said Thursday.
And Bali reopened to international flights from select countries on Thursday, including China, Japan, and France, as the pandemic struck Indonesian holiday island took a step forward or toward welcoming back tourists.
Singapore's central bank tightened monetary policy for the first time in 3 years on Thursday, the latest country to act against inflation as coronavirus hit economies reopen amid continuing supply chain bottlenecks.
And we're happy to have on the program, on our show, Mr. Enrique Ray Glenn Villaroman. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Axel Sprout Corporation, an agricultural business accelerator and consultancy firm, urban farming, the establishment of more post-harvest facilities, and educating the youth on benefits and profitability of agriculture for the future of the country are just some of the initiatives that Axel Sprout actively promotes. Glenn Villaroman is a national mentor for Go Negosyo Kapatid Agri-Mentor Me program and one of the 10 Philippine pioneer mentors in agripreneurship for the ASEAN Mentorship for Entrepreneurs Network, or AMEN, was launched during the ASEAN Summit held in Manila back in November of 2017. Glenn also consults for the Department of Agriculture Secretary William Dar on various projects and initiatives of the government. Welcome to the program, Mr. Glenn Villaroman.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you. This afternoon in Manila, and I guess in the evening in the US. Hello
Yes.
to all our kababayans watching and listening right now.
Sir Glenn, consumers generally do not concern themselves with how food on their table is produced. However, concerns about food security amidst the pandemic have drawn to the infrastructure and logistics of agriculture and the global supply chain. No, so we must relearn now our strategies to crisis-proof our food future. Tell us more, Mr. Glenn. Sir Glenn.
Well, when the pandemic struck last year, the Philippines, as well as many other nations across the world, experienced lockdowns to prevent the spread of the virus. And here in Manila, we had a lockdown in March of 2020. And it was a strict lockdown. And this really affected the supply chain when it comes to agriculture. Whereas before, people took it for granted that when they went to the markets or the supermarkets, there was food to buy. But when the lockdowns hit, the shelves on the supermarkets and the stalls in the wet markets were severely lacking because of the disruption in the supply chain. Because of the strict lockdowns, the transport of food items from the production areas in the provinces was severely hampered, and this actually created a big problem. Luckily, the Department of Agriculture, with the help of the interagency task force, gave special permission for agricultural workers to freely pass through the many checkpoints all over the country, which allowed the food to come from such places as the mountain province, where a lot of the highland vegetables come from, and from other parts of the country. The pandemic has brought a lot of negative problems. But as you mentioned, now people are more aware of the importance of where their food comes from and how it's produced. And it's brought into greater focus the importance of the agriculture industry in any economy of any country.
Limits on the mobility of people, reduce the availability of seasonal workers for planting and harvesting in other countries. How was that farm labor in the Philippines? How's the farm labor in the Philippines affected?
Well, initially, at the start, because there were still no strict guidelines or set guidelines at the time, even the agricultural workers could not go and tend to their farms. That was one of the major problems. Also, the lockdowns also hampered the Department of Agriculture's efforts to control the pest infestation, notably the African swine fever for our hog producers, the fall armyworm infestation for our corn producers. This hampered the movement of the department's personnel to contain and control these infestations. Couple that with the eruption of the Taal volcano and the seasonal typhoons that continually batter the Philippines, it posed quite a challenge. But luckily, with the swift action of the Secretary William Dar, who took over in August of 2019, all of these were mitigated, and the negative impact was lessened greatly.
Yeah, the small farmers, their delivery were affected as well.
Yes. The private sector stepped in. The logistics companies collaborated with the department, as well as the vehicles of delivery, the trucks of the Department of Agriculture and other government agencies from the LGUs pitched together to ensure that the harvests were brought to the marketplace. It was a collective effort from all levels of government as well as the private sector. And happy to say now that that is not a problem anymore.
That's not a problem. That's very good. Are there any plans set up by the Department of Agriculture to strengthen the food supply chain system? Plans to be responsive to the needs of the farmers, food manufacturers, and processors during the pandemic?
Well, the supply chain and value chain is actually one of the areas of focus for the Department of Agriculture these days. Coupled with 5 key strategies, interrelated key strategies of the department to modernize and put together a vibrant, food resilient Philippines. You have the farm consolidation strategy, mobile mechanization, industrialization, infrastructure, and of course, export promotion. The value chain and the supply chain plays a very important role in all of these strategies. And programs are being implemented as we speak to actually address all of these. Because if you will remember, about 4 decades ago, the Philippines was considered one of the leaders in the ASEAN region for agriculture. Sad to say, if you look at the state of Philippine agriculture these days, it's like looking at something from a time capsule. So it hasn't really changed over the years. The same problems that we faced 4 decades ago still persist to this day, which is the farmer poverty, low production yields, non-competitiveness in the world market are still problems to this day, which we are trying to address with the help, of course, of the private sector, because government can't really do it alone. And this is something that the leadership right now understands. So we see collaborations with government and the private sector to bring about the necessary changes and improvements to really bring forward and bring out the full potential of Philippine agriculture.
Mhm. So what is being done? What is the government doing to improve the Philippine agriculture?
Well, the approach is on a two-pronged level. First, we're also looking at the grassroots level, and here is where the private sector actually plays a very big and important role. As you mentioned earlier, with the help of the Philippine Center for Entrepreneurship, the DA is collaborating with Go Negosyo to help educate the farmers on more modern farming techniques, scientifically proven, helping them understand the changes occurring in the marketplace, and also helps them to change their mindset to think more of themselves as entrepreneurs rather than just farmers. It is important that they get to see the big picture, because really we are wanting to organize this in conjunction with the programs that the Department of Agriculture are currently implementing, which is actually really based on cooperation and collaboration. Like I said earlier, the strategies of farm consolidation, because really the farmers these days produce on small parcels of land from anywhere from half a hectare to about 1.5 hectares, which really cannot produce the scale that will justify, investments in post-harvest handling and manufacturing and processing facilities. So it is important that the farmers band together, produce the scale on high-value crops other than the traditional crops of coconut, rice, corn, and sugar. There are high-value crops in high demand in the world marketplace, which is being given the focus and attention these days. Also, industrialization, meaning we create like a pineapple industry, a coconut industry within the sector, which will allow us to mitigate costs and be more competitive in the world market. Mechanization plays a key part in that, and also the infrastructure. Right now, I would say that we're about 20 years behind our ASEAN neighbors when it comes to the technology transfer, infrastructure, capabilities of the Philippines, and again, not enough focus was given on these past years, which we are trying to address right now. So, of course, also, the first order of business is to be food secure, but also produce enough to be able to compete in the export market, because the Philippines has barely scratched its potential to be a player in the world agricultural market. So these are the things that are being done. It's a two-pronged approach, grassroots and national.
It's like what's happening in other parts of the world. Yeah, bottlenecks in transport and logistics, like in the US.
Yes.
They were key disruptions during this pandemic. What shifts in practices, as you were earlier mentioning, and technology were applied to immediately address these challenges?
Well, first of all, we are focusing a lot on digitalization these days.
Yes.
Because of the pandemic, the way business is transacted is now a lot on the internet, and that's part of the educational process, like I mentioned earlier, on how to actually bring the products from the production areas to the end users. So one key strategy that's being implemented is the digitalization. A lot of digital platforms are coming up from private and the government sector. The Department of Agriculture has revived the Kadiwa program, which allows the local farmers to be able to sell within their communities so to basically mitigate the profit losses that they do when they only rely on farm gate sales. Also, again, logistics companies have stepped forward. Agriculture and the farm and its stakeholders were not really given the due importance when it comes to nation building. We know that agriculture is an important pillar in any country's development and stability, and we kind of forgot about that. So changing public perceptions, because when you say you're in agriculture, immediate perception is, oh, number one, you're poor, you're either un or undereducated, and which is not really the case, because when you look at the curriculum for agricultural grads, it's very heavy on science. Yes. So to say that they're undereducated or uneducated, it's really a fallacy which we're trying to change. Number one, that's the change in the public perception. Two, we're becoming more aware on the self-sufficiency. We've seen a rise in people's interest in urban farming. They plant in their backyards, produce their own food. They see the importance of where their food comes from, how they're grown, because now we see the correlation between the heavy use of pesticides and chemicals into health issues that people go through. Now, there's been a greater awareness of how your food is produced. It's funny because a child was interviewed once and they were asked, where does your food come from? And they said, oh, from the supermarket, which is really what I find. They have no idea. They've never seen let's say a tomato plant or an eggplant plant or okra plant. They've never seen anything like that. So now with the greater interest in urban farming and people's looking at ways, to be more self-sufficient food-wise, it's a welcome change. It's a breath of fresh air to actually see that happening right now.
It's true. And as I was saying earlier nga po, ang tingin natin sa farmers noon, kasi parang ang layo nila sa atin eh. Pero ngayon, because of the pandemic, we now realize how important and essential they are. Ano po?
Yes. Kasi another key part of the strategy is to attract the youth back into agriculture by showing them the potential, the income potential in agriculture. Because when you really crunch the numbers, you will be surprised at the earning potential that you can, if it is done right, if it is strategized right, how much money can be made. And, we are now attracting the youth because we have an aging farmer population. That the average age for farmers these days is about 57. So we're looking to attract the youth through things that they are interested in. Well, of course, they would be interested in making a lot of money, but also in such things as, technology, involving technology in the agricultural process, which attracts the youth right now. And so we're very happy to see that there's more and more youth and even corporate people going into agriculture because they see the income potential there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have another question. Farmers and growers have faced cash flow disruption and regulatory issues tied to new supply chain expectations. Many people around the world have volunteered to sell and distribute the produce of farmers. And this has been happening here in Thailand, Japan, and even in Great Britain. Is this a short-term adaptation to the pandemic by removing the middleman to get farm goods direct to the door of each household?
Well, in the case of the Philippines, the middleman has always played a big role, but we've seen that really it is very detrimental to the farmers themselves, because farm gate prices are typically the lowest prices that they can get, rather than going direct to the consumers or the end users. Because really, if you're the middleman, you try, as a businessman also, you try to buy low from your suppliers, and because you still have cost, transportation, handling, all of that. So by the time it reaches us, the end user, the consumers, the prices are really higher. So not to say that we want to get the middlemen out of the equation, but to limit and the reliance of farms, because really farm gate prices take away the income potential of the producers themselves. And it's also good for the consumers, because if the farmers are able to sell directly to them, they can get their produce at a much lower cost. And so, private companies have stepped up, like Planters Products have stepped up. They have they buy direct from the farmers at a competitive market price, and they have already a link to market. I mentioned the Kadiwa model that's been implemented now in different LGUs all over the country, where the farmers can sell their products directly to the consumers. So, plus also the online platforms where the farmers can post their products and sell directly with the help of the logistics companies who will deliver it for them. So there's a lot of things going on right now as far as alleviating the concerns of the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Earlier, you were also already mentioning the economic prospects for agriculture in the future. Can you tell us more?
Well, the answer there comes with a caveat. I would say the prospects are really bright. With the changes and progress that's being witnessed right now, it's bright. But, and here comes the caveat, is that the programs and the procedures that are being put into place these days need to be continued, because the problems that we're facing right now didn't happen overnight. This is a result of many, many years of not being addressed properly. So change doesn't happen overnight. So we have to resist our feelings of instant gratification and know that growth is an incremental process. If so long as there's steady growth over the years, then that is what we seek to achieve. And I believe that, with the programs that are now being implemented, of which we're already seeing some success, the continuance of these practices and programs are key to the sustainable long-term growth of agriculture in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm. I have another question, sir.
Yes.
The pandemic directly affected the policy direction. For example, I'm linking it to my news at night. For example, in Europe, it has streamlined certification procedures by allowing green lanes and electronic signatures. Has the pandemic directly affected your policy direction?
Well, there has been some modifications to account for the current conditions that we're facing right now. One of the things that has always been at the forefront is to make doing business easier, the ease of doing business, So we're trying to streamline processes to remove the red tape, so to speak, and bureaucracy. And of course, with the limited movement of people, it is necessary to really make the necessary adjustment to streamline the process so as not to really cause a major disruption like we experienced last year. So yes, in answer to your question, measures are being taken to streamline and make things easier because of what we're facing with the pandemic.
Mhm. Like, for example?
Well, well, of course, now one of the things that are being implemented is giving easier access for our farmers to funding. The Agricultural Credit Policy Council has been offering low-cost loans. And this is something that you can actually achieve online. You submit your documentations, you submit your proposals, your business plans, and you can conceivably get approved for a zero-interest, no collateral loan, which would help the funding requirements of our producers immensely. You don't have to show up. You can do it online. That's one thing that is being done right now. The certification processes are trying to be streamlined, but of course, still there's still limitation of movement with the Delta variant still prevalent. So, more online and Wi-Fi processing is being done. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Do you have any message for our viewers right now? Any last words, Mr. Sir Glenn?
Well, like they say, behind every gray cloud is a silver lining. We are experiencing something unprecedented in history. The coronavirus has disrupted our lives in more ways than one. The silver lining being it has brought greater attention and focus to really what is important in our lives, really. Our families, our friends, and the time that we have. One of the things that I would say would be a silver lining, as we mentioned earlier, is now the importance of agriculture and the many stakeholders have on our lives on a day-to-day basis. We need farmers 3 times a day when we eat. And, we are now more conscious of what we put in our bodies. For all the hardships and tears that the pandemic brought, I would say that the awareness and importance of the agricultural stakeholders are highlighted now. And with the changes and programs that I'm seeing here in the Philippines, I would say the prospects look bright as long as we stick with it. Let's not expect immediate changes. Changes will come. We've already seen it. And it will continue to come if we stick with it. I encourage our kababayans to really look into what they can do, because we've gotten a lot of inquiries from OFWs about wanting to come home and investing. So that's another positive sign.
Safety nets and agricultural assistance are essential to avoid food insecurity. So it's time to recognize agriculture as our country's, as you said, game changer.
It is the game changer.
With that,
well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure being here with you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir. Till next time, huwag po kayo magsasawa.
Thank you. Anytime. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glenn Villaroman. And ASEAN in Focus, we'll be right back.
Sa barangay sa palagay nyo? Abangan! Simula October 18, Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 8 hanggang alas 10 ng umaga. Mapapanood sa Net25 TV, Facebook page and YouTube channel. Mapapakinggan din sa DZEC 1062 at Eagle FM 95.5.
Hindi ito namumunga at hindi pa lubos na nakikilala. Abay sa larangan ng agrikultura, ito pala ay umaarangkada.
Halaman?
Hindi ko alam.
Hindi ko alam yung kung ano yun. Citronella yung tinanim namin kasi madali hong kumita. Tuloy-tuloy po yung harvest.
Nag-try ako dito lang sa paligid ko lang. Ang dami namang nagbilihan.
Skincare, personal care, home care, plant care, pet care. Kayang-kaya ng Citronella.
Mayroon siyang calming ingredients, nare-relax yung buong katawan mo.
Lots of benefit in one product lang.
Ako po si Robin Padilla at ito po ang unlad. Kagapay sa hanap buhay.
Innovation, digital disruption, globalization. Startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as large corporations, all face interesting challenges in the market today. Peek into the world of exciting opportunities and partnerships to drive growth with the latest business news and information. We are open for business. Your weekly dose of entrepreneurial inspiration to update you on the latest developments in the world of business. Get up close and personal with CEOs and thought leaders to help you discover valuable insights, sharpen your instincts for smart decision making with the latest markets and economic trends, disruptive ideas, global innovation, social entrepreneurship, and other leading-edge business ideas. Join the conversations to create a more vibrant environment for entrepreneurship. Catch Open for Business, from vision to action.
Thank you so much, Sir Glenn, for that wonderful interview with Alma. Meanwhile, Manila, with the recall of the termination of the Visiting Forces Agreement, or VFA, with the United States, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, said this will allow it to push forward activities related to the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA. The final decision on the withdrawal of the abrogation of the VFA now allows to push forward the delayed activities regarding like the exercise-related constructions with regards to the EDCA. AFP Chief of Staff General Jose Faustino Jr. said in a virtual presser on Thursday afternoon, shortly after the 2021 Mutual Defense Board Security Engagement Board, or MDB-SEB, meeting in Camp Aguinaldo, Quezon City. The MDB was established in 1958 and the SEB was established in 2006. The two boards form the annual MDB-SEB, which coordinates a framework for defense and security cooperation between the U.S. and Philippine militaries. Finalized after 8 rounds of talks that began in August 2013, the EDCA, which was signed in April 2014, allows U.S. troops access to designated Philippine military facilities, the right to construct facilities and preposition equipment, aircraft, and vessels, but rules out permanent basing. Meanwhile, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Head Admiral John Aquilino, who was present during Thursday's MDB-SEB meeting, said the United States has released $12.5 million to meet the responsibilities outlined in the previous EDCA. The Philippines will also allow cinemas and gyms to reopen in the capital of Manila. An official said Thursday after a sharp fall in the daily number of coronavirus infections and increased vaccinations. Restrictions have been eased in recent weeks as the government shifts its focus to getting people back to work and easing the economic misery caused by hard lockdowns. We must pay attention to job creation at this time, presidential spokesman Harry Roque told a news conference. Cinemas and gyms, which have been closed for most of the pandemic, will be allowed to resume limited operations on Saturday for fully vaccinated people. Maximum allowed capacities for restaurants, churches, and beauty salons were raised to 30%, as the metropolis was lowered to the third highest alert level. Nearly 80% of the adult population in the capital has been fully vaccinated, compared with just over 30% for the entire country, according to official data. In another news, the World Health Organization's representative in the Philippines called for very clear messaging about restrictions to avoid putting people's lives at risk. Let's take a look.
This is a global pandemic, and we are adjusting or calibrating the restrictions because we don't want to talk about lowering or relaxing. It is important to understand that we are trying to manage and bring back as much economic activity as possible while not putting people's lives at risk. So this adjusting and calibrating is important, and we need to be very clear in our communication. It's not about relaxing or reducing the restrictions. It's about calibrating so that we continue to take risk-based measures. We continue to urge the population to do everything, the physical distancing, the hand hygiene, the mask wearing, even though they are fully vaccinated, because these are critically important to maintain against and further strengthen the transmission reduction. We now have less than 2,000 cases on the average on a daily basis in NCR. We want to see that going down further. And so we need to be very careful in calibrating and adjusting restrictions so that we don't get risk. At the same time, we are also aware that in some regions we are still seeing increasing trend and transmissions, particularly in regions that spokes Harry just mentioned in northern Luzon and some parts of Visayas and Mindanao. So we are not completely out of this, and we need to be very careful the messaging and the relaxation of the non-pharmaceutical interventions.
Meanwhile, Singapore has announced it is easing coronavirus lockdown restrictions and will allow quarantine-free travel from a number of nations. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said it was time to press on with the strategy of living with COVID-19. Let's listen in.
Yet, Singapore cannot stay locked down and closed off indefinitely. It would not work, and it would be very costly. Each time we tighten up, businesses are further disrupted. Workers lose jobs. Children are deprived of a proper childhood and school life. Families are separated for even longer, especially families with loved ones overseas and extended families who've not been able to come together. We should respect COVID-19, but we must not be paralyzed by fear. Let us go about our daily activities as normally as possible, taking necessary precautions and complying with SMMs. In particular, we must continue to reopen our borders safely. Companies and investors need to carry out regional and global business from Singapore. We have started vaccinated travel lanes with Germany and Brunei, and just announced another with South Korea. These pilot projects have shown it is possible for vaccinated persons to travel safely while letting in very few COVID-19 positive cases. We are implementing more such arrangements, especially with countries whose COVID situations are stable. This will keep us connected to global supply chains and help to preserve Singapore's hub status.
According to BBC, he said so-called vaccinated travel lanes with Germany and Brunei had been successful and would be extended to 9 other countries. Singapore had very tight restrictions in place to tackle the pandemic. COVID-19 related deaths are very low, but the lockdown has had an impact on the Southeast Asian island status as a business and aviation hub. Meanwhile, in Thailand, as they plan to fully reopen to vaccinated tourists traveling by air from countries deemed low risk from November 1, announces Premier Prayut Chan-o-cha. His announcement significantly loosens up current restrictions in place for vaccinated tourists who must undergo at least 7 days hotel quarantine. Thailand's so-called sandbox scheme in Phuket, which allows vaccinated tourists to move freely around the popular beach island, currently requires them to remain there for a week. Visitors outside of Thailand's designated 10 low-risk countries are welcome, but they have to be in quarantine, said Prayut, adding that more nations would be added to the green list in December. Last year, Thailand lost about $50 billion in tourism revenue as foreign arrivals plunged 83% to 6.7 million from a record of 39.9 million 2 years ago. The kingdom is still registering about 10,000 new cases a day, largely fueled by the highly contagious Delta variant. It has more than 1.7 million cases to date and has recorded 17,751 dead. In Bali, as they reopened to international flights from selected countries on Thursday, including China, Japan, and France, as the pandemic struck Indonesian holiday island took a step toward welcoming back tourists. But authorities in Bali, which lost its primary source of income as tourism dried up, said there were no international flights expected on Thursday. Foreign visitors must be vaccinated, quarantine in a hotel for 5 days, and follow strict visa requirements under new entry rules for travelers. We're ready and waiting for international flights, said airport spokesman Taufan Yudhistira. But so far, there's nothing scheduled today. Bali's Ngurah Rai International Airport was open to travelers from 19 countries, including South Korea, China, Japan, France, the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, and New Zealand, authorities said. The partial reopening, however, does not include Australians, a key source of the millions of tourists who flocked to the Palm Fringe Island before the pandemic. Indonesia was previously devastated by the highly contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus, recording more than 56,000 new COVID cases in just one day in mid-July. The government announced emergency restrictions in the hardest hit areas, shutting down non-essential businesses and limiting people's movement. But case numbers are now falling nationwide as the government ramps up vaccinations across the Southeast Asian archipelago of 270 million people. Authorities have begun a steady easing of restrictions as the country sees a decrease in daily confirmed COVID cases and deaths. Singapore's central bank tightened monetary policy for the first time in 3 years on Thursday. the latest country to act against inflation as coronavirus hit economies reopen amid continuing supply chain bottlenecks. The move by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, came as the economy grew 6.5% year-on-year in the third quarter, according to preliminary estimates extending the city-state's recovery from its worst ever recession last year due to the pandemic. Singapore has taken a strategy of living with the virus by ramping up its vaccination rate, currently at around 85%, as it opens up the economy and eases travel for those who have been vaccinated. MAS move is in response to concerns that inflation globally may stay elevated for longer than what may be currently perceived, said Song Sing-woon, a regional economist with CIMB Private Banking. Singapore conducts monetary policy through the exchange rate in which the local dollar is managed against a basket of the currencies of its major trading partners. MAS said Thursday it will raise slightly the slope of the Singapore dollar's exchange policy band from 0%, which would allow for a modest appreciation of the unit. This will ensure price stability over the medium term while recognizing the risk to the economic recovery, it said. Singapore has registered more than 135,000 virus cases, but a very low level of fatalities compared with other countries reporting just 192 deaths. ASEAN in Focus will be right back.
Kamusta ka na? Mukhang habang buhay akong mangungulila sa tinig mo, sa tawag mo.
Hello guys, ako nga pala si Popert Bernadas at abangan niyo po ako bilang guest performer sa Letters and Music ngayong darating na linggo, October 17 from 1 to 2 p.m. Dito lamang sa Net25. See you po!
At ibulong ang nararamdaman mo.
Iba't ibang sakuna at kalamidad ang nararanasan ng bansa. Kapag may banta ng panganib, kailangang maging alerto at kung kailangang lumikas ay magtungo sa ligtas na lugar. Bilang paghahanda sa mga ganitong pagkakataon, mahalaga na may gobag na dadalhin ang pamilya. Narito ang dapat na nilalaman ng gobag ng isang pamilyang handa. Mahalagang dokumento sa selyadong lalagyan, flashlight, kandila, posporo at silbato, radyo na may bago at ekstrang baterya, first aid kit kasama ang panlunas sa lagnat, LBM, sugat at iba pa. Ang mga gamot na regular na iniinom ng pamilya. Mga gamit para sa mga sanggol, bata, matatanda at may kapansanan, pera at mga barya. Pagkain na madaling ihanda, di na kailangang lutuin at sapat para sa 3 araw. Inuming tubig sa saradong lalagyan at sapat para sa 3 araw. Telepono, power bank at charger. Lubid, lumang dyaryo, matitibay na lalagyan. Damit, kapote, bota at mga sanitary supplies. Sleeping bag o banig at mga kumot. Suriin ang mga laman ng gobag kada 3 buwan at palitan ang mga laman nito na malapit nang masira. Ilagay ang gobag sa lugar na madali itong makita at makuha sa oras ng sakuna.
And you're still watching ASEAN in Focus. Vietnam approves COVID vaccination for 12 to 17 age group. And Vietnam mules over resumption of domestic tourism. Here's Ralph, Wandolph Empire reporting us live. Hi, Ralph.
Hi there, Crystal. That's right. The Ministry of Health approved yesterday the administration of COVID-19 vaccines for those aged 12 to 17, prioritizing those aged 16 to 17. The COVID-19 vaccines administered have to be approved by the Health Ministry for the particular age group in accordance with instructions from their manufacturers. The vaccines have to be administered in 2 doses, with both being of the same vaccine. Parents or other legal guardians must sign their consent for their children's vaccination. The ministry did not explicitly say which types of COVID-19 vaccine would be used for children aged 12 to 17. So far, only the Pfizer vaccine has been approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, for this particular age range. Localities can formulate plans and begin giving out first vaccine shots from later this month. Once all conditions are met, the ministry said. Local health departments would cooperate with their education department peers to list all students from 6 to 12 grades. The shots would be given at fixed vaccination points and mobile vaccination stations. In localities where students are allowed to study in person, children can be vaccinated at their schools. Now, in other news, on October 14, which was yesterday, Deputy Prime Minister Wu Duk-dam chaired a working session with leaders of the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, and the Ministry of Health to deliberate on gradual resumption of domestic tourism and pilot reopening to foreign tourists. The issue was taken into consideration as the country's vaccine coverage rate is increasing quickly and more vaccines are expected to land in Vietnam from now to the end of this year. Wu tasked the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism to adopt concrete instructions on how the tourism sector would adapt safely to the COVID-19. He also asked the Ministry of Transport to promptly issue concrete instructions for road, railway, and air transport activities. Earlier in September, the Prime Minister, Mr. Pham Minh Chinh, agreed with the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism's proposal to trial the reopening of Phu Quoc Island in the southern province of Kiên Giang to foreign tourists. From November 2021 to March 2022, Phu Quoc Island will be the first destination to welcome foreign arrivals on a pilot basis, mainly from source markets with good management of the COVID-19 pandemic and high vaccination rates such as Northeast Asia, the Europe, the US, the Middle East, and Australia. Foreign tourists who wish to visit the island shall be required to get fully vaccinated with the second dose taken at least 14 days and not more than 12 months before the date of entry, and must be tested negative for COVID-19 within 72 hours before their departure. Based on the outcomes of the pilot policy in Phu Quoc Island, the tourism sector may consider reopening of other favorite tourist destinations such as Halong Bay in northern province of Quang Ninh, Hoi An City in the central province of Quang Nam, Nha Trang City in the central province of Cain Hoa, and Dalat City in the central highland province of Lam Dong to foreign arrivals. Meanwhile, from November this year, localities where the pandemic is put under control may consider allowing domestic visitors who are fully vaccinated, provided that preventive measures are observed. Back to you, Crystal.
Thank you so much for all the updates, Ralph. So you keep safe there and healthy.
Likewise, Crystal, I'm reporting live from Da Nang, Vietnam. This is Ralph Randall Empire. We live in interesting times.
And the annual Balikatan exercises between the Philippines and the United States will go full scale next year. Armed Forces of the Philippines Chief General Jose Faustino Jr. said yesterday. He also added that cooperation between AFP and the United States has improved when it comes to maritime security, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, cybersecurity, and also information sharing, among others. Let's listen in.
Both the AFP and the U.S. Armed Forces, we look forward to ongoing close cooperation in areas central to our national and security interests, including counterterrorism, maritime security, cybersecurity, humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief, and many others.
The alliance is stronger today than it's ever been. We value the capabilities, capacity, expertise that our Philippine counterparts bring.
Even during the previous years, already have observer countries. To name a few, we have Japan, we have Australia, and we are looking for, we involve, like I said, like-minded countries.
We will both look for opportunities to increase the complexity, the scope, all the way to look towards new partners participating in the future.
Meanwhile, the number of activities and participants during this year's exercises held from April 12 to the 23rd was scaled down in compliance with health and safety protocols. Faustino and Aquilino's meeting resulted in the successful completion of the MDB-SEB, ensuring continued relations between Americans and the Filipino forces. The U.S. and the Philippines agreed to hold over 300 activities for this year. Thank you, Krista, for keeping me company today. As always, keep safe and have a safe and good weekend.
Likewise, Alma, and that's the latest news in the ASEAN region. Thank you for joining us today here in ASEAN in Focus. Once again, I am Crystal Ann Ballesteros from your EBC Cambodia Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
And we'll see you back on Monday. Same time, same place, here on ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.